Nice.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to a chat. I appreciate what you guys are doing with having different and oftentimes difficult conversations with people that you may not agree with. Like I tell my students that all the time. Where I'm based at Rice University, everyone's talking about the importance of having a safe space. And, I think at times, obviously that's important, but like, you can't just shut off people. Like by doing that, you're shutting off the world and you're shutting off yourself from learning and from growing, So I tell them, like, go talk with people that you don't agree with, like we can do this in a civil manner. And I feel like that's kind of what you're getting at with your podcast.
Yeah, we are trying to do that. And I've been thinking a lot and having a lot of conversations with people in Sweden about safe places as well. I heard of another term, brave spaces instead of safe places.
I mean, that's what I tell them. I'm like, that's what we're trying to create, a brave space, like to a point where you feel courageous, not courageous, but like you can speak up. And whatever anyone else says is not going to get under your skin anyways, because you're confident in who you are and you feel like yourself. And that's what we want to get with people, like we don't want these kind of timid people who like are afraid of getting their feelings hurt, like that's not good. I don't think that's good. But
so in your experience, why do you think we're seeing this divide between people wanting brave conversations and people wanting safe conversations?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it does have to do with privilege, like oftentimes when I speak about brave spaces, students are coming back at me and saying, well, you're a white male, heterosexual, coming from a Christian background. So like I'm able to operate in that brave space. Whereas other people from, marginalized and less privileged backgrounds don't have that same background, and they can't kind of exist in places or operate in these spaces without being marginalized. So I think the privilege thing has a lot to do with it, to be honest. And like, it's not just white privilege. It's privilege comes in so many different forms. It's not just in this country we tend to focus on like white privilege, but like Christian privilege, like sex privilege, class privilege, like even being like being able to function on a daily basis. Like the fact that I'm not disabled is a privilege. So I think that's a big issue. And what I try to do with my classes is I try to create an environment where people are ready to have difficult conversations, but without it, without it becoming harmful to them, and finding ways to try to empower people. It's not easy, but it sometimes works. So that's good.
I mean, how do you do that? How do you prepare your students to have difficult conversations? Because I come from a background of living as a refugee, and sometimes feeling like a second-class citizen in Sweden, even though I didn't even choose to move there, and I've been feeling I've connected to victimhood in some parts of my life, but I've also felt the need not to do that. Like I felt the need to not accepting the people calling me a victim or people telling me that I'm disprivileged. So that's also something that a lot of my friends and I've talked about while growing up, not accepting the narrative of victimhood that people place upon us.
Yeah. And and like that's I think what you just said is really important, trying to overcome this kind of victimhood mentality. And I think in recent years, it's one of the reasons why I've kind of been pushing back against the identity politics, because identity politics focuses so much on specific groups, and the narratives that tend to come out of identity politics conversations oftentimes focus on oppression, right?
Right.
marginalization and unfortunate experiences. And, you know, one thing I've seen here in Houston, and Muslim, you know, second, third generation Muslim parents have told me that all of this identity politics discourse in the United States on Islamophobia and Muslims being second-class citizens, like, people are starting to believe this.
Yeah.
Young people are starting to believe it, and they're starting to, you know, think to themselves, well, I am a second-class citizen. I really don't belong here. And then what happens is they stop kind of wearing.
Do you have any questions? Is there anything you want me to clarify?
No. We had a good chat yesterday, Jill and I.
Nice.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to a chat, you know. I appreciate what you guys are doing with, you know, having different and oftentimes difficult conversations with people that you may not agree with, you know. Like, I tell my students that all the time, you know. Where I'm based at, Rice University, everyone's talking about, you know, the importance of having a safe space. And, you know, I think at times, obviously, that's important, but, like, you can't just shut off people. Like, by doing that, you're shutting off the world, and you're shutting off yourself from learning and from growing, you know? So I tell them, like, go talk with people that you don't agree with, you know? Like, we can do this in a civil manner, and I feel like that's kind of what you're getting at with your podcast.
Yeah, we are trying to do that, and I've been thinking a lot and having a lot of conversations with people in Sweden about safe places as well. I heard of another term, brave spaces instead of safe places.
I mean, that's what I tell them. I'm like, you know, that's what we're trying to create, a brave space, you know, like to a point where you feel courageous, not courageous, but like you can speak up. And what else, like whatever anyone else says is not going to get under your skin anyways, because you're confident in who you are and you feel like yourself. And that's what we want to get with people, you know, like we don't want these kind of timid people who like are afraid of getting their feelings hurt, you know, like that's not good. I don't think that's good. But
so in your experience, why do you think we're seeing this divide between people wanting brave conversations and people wanting safe conversations?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it does have to do with privilege, you know, like oftentimes when I speak about brave spaces, students are coming back at me and saying, well, you know, you're a white male, heterosexual, coming from a Christian background. So like I'm able to operate in that brave space. Whereas other people from, you know, marginalized and less privileged backgrounds don't have that same background, and they can't kind of exist in places or operate in these spaces without being marginalized. So I think the privilege thing has a lot to do with it, to be honest. And like, it's not just white privilege. It's privilege comes in so many different forms, you know. It's not just in this country we tend to focus on like white privilege, but like Christian privilege, like sex privilege, class privilege, like even being like being able to function on a daily basis, you know, like the fact that I'm not disabled is a privilege. So I think that's a big issue. And you know, what I try to do with my classes is I try to create an environment where people are ready to have difficult conversations, but without it, you know, without it becoming harmful to them, and finding ways to try to empower people. It's not easy, you know, but it sometimes works. So that's good.
I mean, how do you do that? How do you prepare your students to have difficult conversations? Because I mean, I come from a background of living as a refugee, and you know, sometimes feeling like a second-class citizen in Sweden, even though I didn't even choose to move there, and I've been feeling. I've connected to victimhood in some parts of my life, but I've also felt the need not to do that. Like I felt the need to not accepting the people calling me a victim or people telling me that I'm disprivileged. So that's also something that a lot of my friends and I've talked about while growing up, not accepting the narrative of victimhood that people place upon us.
Yeah. And yeah, you know, and like that's I think what you just said is really important. Trying to overcome this kind of victimhood mentality. And I think in recent years, it's one of the reasons why I've kind of been pushing back against the identity politics, you know, because identity politics focuses so much on specific groups, and the narratives that tend to come out of identity politics conversations oftentimes focus on oppression, right? Marginalization and unfortunate experiences. And, you know, one thing I've seen here in Houston, and Muslim, you know, second, third generation Muslim parents have told me that all of this identity politics discourse in the United States on Islamophobia and Muslims being second-class citizens, like people are starting to believe this. Yeah. Young people are starting to believe it, and they're starting to, you know, think to themselves, well, I am a second-class citizen. I really don't belong here. And then what happens is they stop kind of wearing their ethnic, racial, and religious identities proudly. And what ends up happening is like people just, you know, give up on their roots, on their ethnicity and their ancestry, and then they just become like, you know, these kind of walking blobs and zombies, and with no identity. So, you know, it's really hard in this day and age, especially with social media, because social media is just so like negative and it's a black hole. Oftentimes there's a lot of positives to it as well, but like trying to keep the discourse positive and trying to you know, push people to create. I always tell my students, like, if you're feeling oppressed, like if you're feeling marginalized, like just push back against it. Like go out and create something. Unfortunately, maybe work harder. You know what I mean? Like it's tough, but like there's a fine balance of recognizing and addressing the marginalization 100%, but the discourse can't be all that. If the discourse is all that, then it's just miserable. It's a miserable existence. You're just going to think of yourself as belonging to a second-class, marginalized community that has no hope of being socially mobile. We don't want that out of people. We want it out of people.
Yeah, but also often the truth is somewhere in between, or often like double or triple layered. It's not either or. And what identity politics often does to one, what identity politics has meant to me is I need to choose. Like I'm either Persian or Swedish, and I'm half this and I'm half that, and it connects a lot to thoughts I had when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, thinking of, you know, where do I belong? Who am I? Am I Swedish? Am I Persian? Am I 50% this, 50% that? And me and my friends started to talk about, you know, the whole discussion around third culture. We talked about, I don't know if you guys have this term of in-between shit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I do, because I know it in my studies, you know, but like I use the term third space, which is, it's quite similar, but it's funny you mention it because I brought it up in my class, my Muslims in American Society class a couple months ago, and no one had heard it, you know, like this space of like confluence and hybridity and synthesis. It's neither here nor there. It's both.
Yeah, it's both.
So, you know, I appreciate what you say as well. And I think building off of what you said, you know, this idea of like having to choose, you know, like this is your ethnicity, this is your nationality, this is your religion, and like, you know, you're compartmentalized and these are your categories. Like part of the reason that we've slipped into this narrow-minded thinking is because, and I often speak about this, is our loss of humanity. Like we've forgot that first and foremost, we're human beings. Like we're sons, we're daughters, we're fathers, we're husbands, we're community members. All of these things, which are universal, have been pushed to the side, and now it's all about, you know, race and ethnicity. And I feel like you know, we're forgetting the one thing that makes all of us the same, which is we're humans, you know, and it seems really kind of simple and like, oh, like let's dumb it down. And but like maybe we need to start there more often. Like maybe we need to start at the simple fact of like, hey, we're human, you know, and like rather than talking about, hey, what is it like to be, you know, an Irish Italian Catholic? Like, why don't we just talk about like, hey, like what's going on in your world? What's work like? What's it like to raise your children? What's it like to live in your city? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Oof, hello, we've lost the plot in a lot of ways, I think.
And also, I mean, doing this kind of work, I mean, with the podcast, with the Swedish version of the How Can We podcast for the last 2 years, and then before that, almost 10 years of doing dialogue work and conversational work, I realized that's an even more difficult and harder path to walk. I mean, peace work is not being nice. It's not you know, always friendly. It doesn't always look good. It's hard ass work and a lot of conflict and friction, and you need to have like a double layer of skin to be able to be in those conversations and in those rooms. It's not that, you know, image of people holding hands, you know, singing and getting along. That's bullshit. And I also sometimes you know, go hard on that kind of peace movement, because people ask me sometimes, so what's your intention with your work? Are you aiming at peace? And peace is such a small and like, it's not at all a dream or a vision for me. It's like the farthest from a vision that I have. Peace is not. It's not even. I don't think peace is possible. I'm gonna try to tell you what I mean about that. Peace is like these moments, like these micro nanoseconds of peace. But the aim is to keep a civil discourse and not killing each other. Yeah. And to cooperate enough to be able to explore what we can do together, not only on this planet, but, you know, further on. So I'm excited about the possibility of what we can do together, like in a more playful or adventurous way, if we just manage to not kill each other on the way. Yeah, that's my vision, not peace.
Well, I share that. One, I share two things. The first part you said, like, you know, peace work, or let's call it interfaith work. Like, yeah. I mean, proper peace work and proper interfaith work is not easy at all. And, you know, I often tell my students that, you know, if you're engaging in this type of work, you know, I often use the term allyship. Engage in effective allyship is not easy. Simple allyship is easy. You know, post something on Facebook or Twitter and say, I stand with this community. No, that's not what it is. It's going out there and it's getting messy and it's getting your feelings hurt. And I tell them, you know, like, if you're genuine about this and if you really are trying to make a difference, trying to build bridges with other communities, and say you're at a mosque or a church or a synagogue or whatever it might be, and you mess up, like say you slipped up and you said something that you shouldn't have said. The true effective ally would not be upset that they messed up, right? Because they're in it for a different purpose. If you're in it for the right purpose, you realize, okay, I messed up. I said the wrong thing, time to improve. But if you do get bothered by it, then that's your ego. Your ego becomes involved in it, and then it becomes about you and your feelings getting hurt. And that's not what peacemaking is. It's like, you know, it takes two to tango, as they say. It's a partnership, and it's messy work, and it hurts. You know, like even today, like, you know, I still mess up. You know, like I still say the wrong thing to someone, but I'm like, okay, like this is what I signed up for. Yeah. It's easy. It's not easy work. And then the other point you made with peace, you know, like small moments of peace. I agree with that 100%. And I was reading a book, like the two books I've been reading lately. One is Martin Ling's. I think they're around here somewhere. Martin Ling's biography of Muhammad. And then the other one, which is a really good book, it's right in front of me here. It's called The Prophet of Peace by Juan Cole. And he's writing about Prophet Muhammad's life. And he said that Muhammad had two ideas of peace. One was like a negative peace and a positive peace. Like a negative peace is merely the absence of violence, but a positive peace is like something more, as you mentioned, like creative. Like it's like people actually coming together and like they're putting in the groundwork to make sure that that peace stays in place through friendships, through interactions, and through solidarity. So, no, it's not easy, but we also can't have a futile, miserable, depressed outlook on the world. Like one of the reasons why I think peace often fails is because people have no hope in it. I'm not saying world peace. Like world peace is probably not possible, but like peace at a very small level, as you were mentioning, like people need to believe in that. People need to have hope in that. Because if you don't have hope, like what's going to happen? Probably nothing. There's going to be no success out of any movement,
Right. And also, like, when you say hope in this context, I also hear you saying trust. Like having trust in your neighbor. And one of my best friends, Gustav, he always tell me that trust is to trust someone more than they deserve.
And that's not easy,
It's not, but because the alternative is calculated risk. I mean, if you calculate and then it's not trust. It's not that leap of faith, because trust is to trust someone more than they deserve, more than you can guarantee, more than you know. And that kind of trust, I think, in the end, built hope in a community. But if you don't trust yourself, if you don't trust your friends, if you don't trust your neighbors, it's going to be difficult to trust in a larger scale as well. And I think sometimes it comes down to the idea of, we're supposed to be these individuals, these isolated individuals, managing our psyche, our souls, our lives ourselves. And if we fuck up, it's our fault. It tends to be sometimes a very lonely and very isolated world. And that plays well, I think, with the identity politics, the individual, the ego, identifying these small phenomena and items play very well together and creates a very isolated and distant world, I think. But also we have the possibility of connection, right? The internet is so double-natured. I mean, there's this level of it helping us. It's this beautiful technology, almost mimicking a neural network, almost mimicking an ecosystem, helping us to connect to each other. There's this light and this shadow playing out in the same time, and it's not either or. It's both at the same time.
The double-edged sword. I mean, even think about it. Like if the internet didn't exist, this conversation probably would never exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, straight
exactly.
up. Straight up. So yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. Even on a daily basis, you have people. At least I see messages of like, "Hey, like really good work," and then other people are like, "No, like you're a horrible human." And I'm a heretic, or like, I'm paid by the Saudis. Like I get so many different things. And like, I try to block out that negativity, cause it's really easy to go down into that black hole of yourself. And again, going back to that kind of internalized Islamophobia, like, if you are listening and digesting everything that everyone is saying, you are what you think. Let's put it that way. As you are what you eat, you are what you think. And if you're digesting all of these negative comments, like there's a possibility of it being successful in kind of warping your mind. So linking this back to the conversation of trust, I think one of the reasons why we see alienation, we see hatred and negativity and isolation is because people aren't confident with themselves. People don't trust themselves. People are fragile. They don't want to learn. They don't want to grow. And how can we expect some people who may be kind of grappling with these these things of inferiority or isolation. Like, how can we ask them to be bridge builders? You know, like how can we ask them to go out and I'll give you an example. Like in America, like most of America is like rural. You know, it's like rural, white, evangelical Christian. That's like the heartland of America. And a lot of these people have no experience with diversity in general outside of what they see on the TV. And what they see on the TV is often not productive at all. You know, let's take any mainstream media outlet basically plays into fear. Like, you know, these groups are coming to take over your country, etc. There's violence, your jobs are being taken, etc. And that beats up on people. It beats up on people's psyche, and they feel like they're not comfortable anymore, and they don't trust. They're not confident in themselves, and that's a real problem. You know, not that they're at fault for it. It's just the reality. It's how they've been socialized. It's the information that they're being fed, and it's who's around them. These are kind of close-knit communities that are not diverse. So,
and these groups are being like they're being played against each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's this narrative of you have to choose between these two groups, and then they have this image of Muslims being their enemies. But I mean, the same thing plays out if you watch like Bill Maher or John Oliver, or you watch the more, you know, democratic-leaning stand-ups or news reports. They play the people living in rural America, like these evangelic Christians, against the other group. So this polarization is played out by not only like Fox News, but also other media outlets or influencers or media profiles. Yeah. So it's this game, you know, that you need to, again, you need to choose, you need to belong to this group or that group. So groups are being played against each other on the whole spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, even in the realm of media, you know, like it's so obvious what the ideological like leanings are with each group. And, you know, like it's pretty obvious. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because I study this and I live this, but like, you know, if I'm out at a restaurant or wherever I might be, and like I hear someone speaking about a certain subject in a certain way, I'm almost like, I know exactly what media outlet you heard that from.
Yeah.
It's so like predictable, but it's meant to be predictable. You know, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all these entities, like they're staying in their lane. And as you were saying, that they're pitting each other, groups against each other. And that is just like, I mean, that is so disheartening. So disheartening, especially because they're doing it largely for ratings, and we know that ratings is money. So, you know, I think one thing we have to do, not only here as Americans, but the world in general, is like we need to start teaching our youth how to approach and digest media, how to, you know, decipher like pure BS versus, you know, an ideological perspective or an opinion. Like, you know, like the news is not the news anymore. Like when I was growing up, I remember seeing, you know, in the I was born in '85, but I remember seeing like JFK clips, like when JFK was assassinated, and like I think it was Walter Cronkite just comes on the air and he's like, it's, you know, 10:52 and the president has been shot. That was it. And now, like you turn on CNN and like every 5 minutes it's breaking news with this dramatic music, and it's like, oh my God, like what is happening? And then it's just like, you know, a new leaked paper came out, and it's so dramatized, and it's playing on fear, it's playing on manipulation, and worst of all, it's pitting people against each other, and that's just so damaging. It's so damaging.
Yeah, and I'm curious also to see what happens after this, you know, cycle of intense drama. Does it get worse until it stops, or does it, you know, eat itself up? I don't know. I'm just curious to see what happens after this plays out.
Do you think, I mean, do you think there's going to be, you know, like, is this going to come to like a tipping point? Like, is there going to be like, I mean, what is it? You know, like, are we getting to like a pinnacle of something, and then from there, like, everything resets? Like you feel like it's like
I don't know. I'm not
World War
sure,
II,
man. I just it
like
feels like that. It feels like we're like pivoting to this, peak point where it's all going to explode. But I'm also aware that every generation thinks that they're the final generation. So I'm. It's also group narcissism, right? we believe that we're like this, center of the universe and center of history, and it all, builds up to us, but it doesn't. This will probably play out even further on to the next generation and next generation. I don't even know what it is, or maybe just in a few years AI will just take over like this condescending nanny. Right?
Oh God.
I'll take over from here, guys.
You know what? Like, I'm in your boat. Like, I don't even know what's going to happen. It's hard to predict. I try to be optimistic about it, but I don't know. Especially with recent events, like it does seem like it feels like we're at like a pre-World War I moment where like the whole world is kind of caught up in all of these quagmires, but like the alliances are so obvious. Like if a world war, God forbid, were to ever happen, like it's almost like exactly who's going to line up with who. Whereas like I think World War II was a bit more like precarious. It may not be the best word, but it was a bit more unpredictable. Whereas like World War I was like that one assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Like it was like we knew who was going to align with who. And I feel like what's scary about today is I feel like it's set up. Like it's almost like, is it already figured out? Like, is this already planned? Like, are we just pawns watching a chess match play out? Like, I feel like we might be, which is really which is also really disheartening because if you feel powerless, like you feel like, all the piecework and all the books and the effort you put into all these things are just totally useless because it's in the hands of major powers. And not just countries. I'm not even talking that. I'm talking about, the entities that make countries go round, organizations, corporations and all that stuff, So I hope not. I really hope not, but I don't know.
I'm not even sure because sometimes when you talk about the world, you talk about like these networks or nodes of people in power controlling stuff. I'm not sure, man. I've met human beings. they're not in power of shit.
I understand like we're not. They're like, I agree with you here though. Like it's not like people aren't that smart. Like they're not.
No, they're not in power. I mean, power might play out in these subconscious, dramas or subconscious networks. But I don't even think the people in power are in power.
I like that. That gives.
Yeah, I mean, I see sometimes when I'm where I wear those glasses, I see this images of just kids, like chaotic, messed up kids, without fathers and mothers, just running around trying to find some pieces of a sense of home, right? And that makes me sad but hopeful. Sad, soft, and hopeful.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So, I mean, is it? So no one's really in power.
I don't think so.
It's just like a.
I mean, when you see someone, trying to be in power, like someone really grasping for power, someone trying to control an event, and that event could be your life. Like people who have anorexia try to control eating, and then they get an eating disorder, or an abusive like father tries to control his emotions and his psyche, and then he ends up controlling his family. And some religious leaders try to control the population or a community. I think when someone tries to control something or someone, who tries to use power again on a group or on a society, that's a person or a group that feels disempowered. That's someone who doesn't feel safe.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You feel safe, you don't need to exercise power. You don't need to control anyone else. So that's what I mean. I don't think the people in power I think those are the most unsafe people in the world.
Unfortunately, yeah, I agree. And it brings us back to our ego discussion, like people are not really in tune with what is really happening inside of their mind, their heart, their soul, their body, their existence. It's just, it's fear. Like, I think what you said, people are acting that way out of fear of maybe who they are, but fear of what's happening around them. They feel lost. And it's really unfortunate, I mean, if what we're saying is true, this is not, I don't want anyone to feel like that, like I want people to be happy. I don't want, my mother always said, don't wish harm on people. And like, that's true. Like, I want to see people confident and happy, but, man, it's just so hard, to kind of deconstruct things and to, especially, people like older in life, like I know my dad, like for my own family, like there are certain things like that will just never change. Just can't, there's wounds, there's scars, there's experiences, there's socialization, and all these things are, how do you deconstruct that, like at a very individual level? And then bigger than that, if we were to expand it, if we were to try to like, not rehabilitate a person, but to try to get a person more in touch with their feelings. And then we branch out to like a family, and then a community, and like a city and a nation. And then it's the world, so
that's actually what you're talking about right now. That's peace work. Like, peace work starts on the inside of every individual. And that's what you talked about right now. I think I would call that healing. And I actually don't think it's I don't think it's ever too late. I've seen men, especially men. I've been doing a lot of men's work. I've seen men in their 80s healing childhood trauma.
That's good.
So I'm in that matter, I'm very hopeful. I've seen like people doing individual work, like this really hard therapeutic practice in their 70s, in their 80s, healing like really deep wounds. And I also seen the ripple effect when you see like this 80-year-old man in the center of the circle, and then you see all these young men around him in the circle. When they see him doing that kind of deep work, man, it's beautiful.
I mean, that you're right. That is peace work. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, like peace doesn't necessarily have to be imagined as like the absence of jets flying and dropping bombs and like refugees. Like, if we were to reshape the discourse on peace, like peace is just individual contentment of who someone is. And it really does start with the individual, like you can't expect a community, a nation, a region of the world to come to grips with itself as a collective if the individuals within that collective are not happy.
Yes.
Are not content, So like, and that is peace. Like, peace is just like, I mean, if we were to give adjectives of it, it's just like, it's like calmness. It's confidence. It's happiness. Like, that's what it is. At an individual level, that's what it is. And
I also believe, I mean, those lighter parts of life, like the calmness and the peace and the happiness, I believe in my own experience, to reach that light through darkness, you need to go through that shit. And there's no like shortcut around it. It's like, I'm not going into that dark forest because I would just want to go to the lighter path. It's through that darkness and through that pain. And then on the other side, there's probably some light, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced that too, and like some of the worst things that I've personally been through, like in hindsight, now you look back on it, I'm like, thank God, thank God those things happened. They allowed me to grow, but like I had to go through the trenches, and it wasn't easy. And you don't think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but like, I don't know what it is that gets people through that stuff. And like the stuff I'm talking about, man, it's not even like when I look back at it at the time, it felt like really bad. But like you look back at it now, and it's like nothing, and especially in comparison to other things that are happening in the world. But like you don't feel like things are going to correct themselves. That there's no hope, there's no faith. But again, like when I look back at that stuff, I'm like, man, I'm so glad I went through that. Like I really grew, and it was difficult work, and a lot of people helped me get through these different phases of life. But like I wouldn't be who I am today, and I can say like I'm happy with who I am. Obviously, I'm human, so I have faults, and there are things that I want to be better at. But I'm happy. I'm a happy person.
I mean, we're almost the same age. I think you're born in '84, right?
85, yeah.
85, right? And I'm 83. So I remember. I mean, I remember vividly what happened on 9/11. Me and my friends were playing. We were playing this video game. We were playing Counter-Strike, actually. so we just play this video game in a cellar at one of my friends' mom's house, I think, and we came out. We were playing, on the street as if we were terrorists and counter-terrorists, and we saw this front store window just showing the second plane going into the second tower. And we were still in the mindset of the game. We were like, just for a second, we were like, did we do this? Was this us? Was this our imagination going berserk? That was so surreal. And then the plane went into the second tower, and we just stood there watching it. I called my dad, and he was in this intense space of, well, this is the end.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of what, but this is it. Just pack your bags. We're leaving. Again.
Yeah.
We've done this before. Let's go. But I mean, connected to what you do now, connected to your work, I'm really curious about where you were on 9/11. What happened to you? What were you thinking? And also, what followed?
Wow. Yeah. I was 15. I was a junior at Needham High School in Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. I was in the American legal class, and Miss Nielsen was my teacher. And at the beginning of class, when the first plane went into the first tower, Mr. Walker, who was a teacher in the room over, came into the class and goes up to Miss Nielsen and says, blah, blah, blah. Miss Nielsen addresses us and says, a plane has struck the World Trade Center. And that was it. And I was like, that's not good. I didn't even know what the World Trade Center was, to be honest. Like I didn't know where it was. I didn't know what it did. And class went on as normal. And then however many minutes later, when the second plane struck the second tower, Mr. Walker came back in like a panic. And Miss Nielsen was like, oh God. And, he said, basically like we're under attack, something like that. And we all went into Mr. Walker's room because there was a TV up into the corner of the room, and we just watched the towers go down. And like, it was really surreal, man. Like I grew up in a town that was pretty comfortable. It's a pretty comfortable town, and like, violence and chaos were never part of my existence. It's only something that you see on TV. Like we were in a community that really took peace in the sense of absence of killing for granted. And, I do remember like jets were flying over Boston because one of the planes had left Boston.
Yeah.
And like these fighter jets were like flying over us. And I remember one time, like the whole class just went to the window and we were like, this is it. Because one of the planes was still in the air. And we thought it's going to strike. So anyways, classes ended and, school was canceled. And I remember this very, very vividly. And I even remember like who these people were chanting these things. But, things like F the towel heads. Sorry, I had to use that word. And like sand, N-word. were being deployed by a lot of my peers. You know, USA chants were going on. And like, you know, I was 16. Never met a Muslim. There were no Muslims in our high school, no Muslims in my town of Needham, which is 30,000 people, 98% white, Christian, and the small Jewish population. The closest mosque to my house was like 10 miles away in downtown Boston. So like I had zero context to any of this. And, you know, life carries on when it comes time to college. And like I had to get serious about studying for once in my life, because I was a basketball player in college. And I ended up moving away from sports, and I ended up transferring to American University, and I was attempting to get into the intelligence community. And I was taking classes in Arabic, and I was taking classes in, you know, Middle East politics and the Islamic tradition, not necessarily like Islamophobic or racist towards Muslims in like the traditional sense, but like I had a lot of ideas that I think people who are knowledgeable of what Islamophobic kind of discourse is would be like, this person has been brainwashed to a certain degree. So that's like how I went into college, and things really turned a corner for me when I enrolled in a class called The World of Islam with a professor called Akbar Ahmed. And again, I go into this class, like guy sitting next to me, Ali Khan, Pakistani Muslim, a year older than me, and he starts talking to me, and I'm like, what, you know, who is this guy? He looks like a stereotypical Muslim. He starts talking to me about the NBA basketball. I'm like, this is just weird. Like, this Muslim guy like likes basketball. Like, what's going on? And long story short, Professor Ahmed started that one class with a hadith or a saying of Prophet Muhammad. And, you know, a lot of scholars say it's not authentic and blah, blah, blah. But it was the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. And for me, like, I believed him when he said that. There's something about his sincerity and his ability to communicate this knowledge that like really shook me to the core. And I remember leaving that class, and it was almost like it was like a switch had gone off, and it was almost like, or like a door had been opened in my brain where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let this knowledge, these ideas, or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to let it in, and I'm going to see what happens. And I rolled with him for many years. And like, it just, for me, it wasn't just about, you know, Islam or Christian Muslim relations. It was about knowledge. It was about learning via books, via people, and also like the realization that my mind and my heart they're in my possession. Yes. But a lot of things go into shaping the mind and the heart. And I realized after that class and after many years that it's pretty easy to get brainwashed. It's pretty easy to be misled through like blatantly false information. And in doing so, that corrupts your heart and your soul. So for me, like Islam was just like an avenue to exploring, I think, what I would refer to as like our humanity. So for me, it was about knowledge. A lot of people are just like, oh, like, you know, why Islam for you? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I did not decide any of this. I believe in fate. Like I believe in, this is part of the reason why I was put on earth, like to be who I am in my position, and to be a vehicle for ideas, to be a navigator across religions and cultures and nations. So. Right. Because you're a devoted Catholic, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah. Devoted, yes, but like I'm also living in a secular society. Like for me, my devotion to my Catholic faith has a lot to do with how I treat people, the words that come out of my mouth, my actions. But I'm going to be completely honest, like, you know, in terms of like going to mass every day, like that doesn't happen, man. It just doesn't. I wish I could. When I was living in Dublin, I actually went to mass a lot because it was easy. It was easy to go to because there's a church on every corner. But like I live in Houston, you know, like it's a huge city, And it's hard to do with all these other responsibilities that I have in my life. And
Right.
Am I devoted to the Catholic Church? That's complicated. I love Pope Francis, really appreciate his vision and the stances that he's taken. But like, do I believe in the exploitation that the church often engages in? Absolutely not. Do I believe in the church's position on same-sex marriage and abortion? Absolutely not. So my devotion is mine. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, I'm a Catholic, yes. I'll die as a Catholic. My devotion is mine, and no entity controls it. There are entities that influence it, but like, I'm not a puppet. You know, like, I'm not going to toe the line of an institution, and I'm not going to let that institution, you know, dictate how I act and how I feel. So a lot of people, a lot of people call me like an a la carte Catholic, which is actually kind of accurate. You know, it's like it's a buffet line, and I take what I want in a way, but like, that's modern religion for me.
Right. I mean, why not? There's not like a single way of believing or devoting. I mean, do whatever works, man.
Yeah.
And also what I'm hearing while I listen to you is that you were brought up in a very like homogenic context, and you had your like preferences and your people and your, you know, the concepts and ideas surrounding you, and then when you started to study and get more familiar with the Muslim context and the ideas behind the religion and the culture and the people, it's almost like you had another camera, right? So you had your first camera of conditioning, and then you got your second camera. And through those both lenses, the world appears more complex and more real. And you could have like even a third and a fourth camera.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, there's multiple cameras going on right now, you know? I definitely think one of the tendencies in our modern world is to view everything like in a binary worldview. You know, it's either black or white, this or that. But going back to what we were speaking about earlier, that third space, like, I very much exist. Yeah. I'd like to think I exist in that space where things are neither here nor there. You know, it's not black or white. It's gray. It's fuzzy. It's unpredictable. It shapes itself depending on time and context. Like, it's fluid, basically. To borrow Zygmunt Bauman, one of his theories of liquid identity. You know, like, if you think of when you spill water, like, it's really hard to predict where water is going to go, where it's going to form. And like, I kind of live that life. Like, just, I roll on a daily basis with the punches. And, you know, who knows what the next day is going to be like, what the next journey is going to be like. I just roll with it. And I have faith in a higher power that what I'm doing is what I've meant to do. And hopefully I do it well.
I mean, according to what you've been, according to what you've been doing the last years and what you've been studying and examining and exploring, do you feel hopeful that Muslims and Christians can coexist, and how can groups, like large-scale groups of Muslims and Christians, coexist in modern society? How is that possible, and what do we need to focus on and to do to make that happen?
I mean, I'm hopeful, but in a certain context. Like, I'm hopeful at a local context. You know, I've seen over the years, I mean, I've witnessed it through my own eyes. You know, the relationships that I've formed that are rooted in peace with countless Muslims in this country and the world. I mean, I have hope because I've witnessed it, I've experienced it, and I've felt it. And I've also seen and have hope for communities coming together in, like, towns, for example. You know, an imam and a bishop, or an imam and a priest having a friendship first, and then bringing their congregations together for dialogue, for understanding. I've seen that work. So I think, yes, there's hope, but like, we need to be we need to be practical with the hope. We need to make sure that we're doing the dirty work on the ground in the individual and in the families. Before we get to communities, it starts in the families, and then we can get to the communities. Like this idea of Christians and Muslims on a global scale, I mean, maybe one day that could happen, but I don't think that should be our aim or our goal. I think we all need to start with our immediate surroundings and our everyday experiences. You know, trying befriend a Muslim or a Christian in your class, or in your apartment building, or your neighbor. You know, it's like a trickle effect. You know, I do think it starts at a micro level, and then we can work our way up. But I do have hope. But again, like, we need to be realistic with our expectations.
Right. Are there like any initiatives or projects or community leaders that you know of that do that kind of work that actually benefits the community and it works?
Yeah, definitely. So when I mentioned the priest and the imam coming together, there's a friend of mine. He's based in Dallas, Texas. His name is Pastor Bob Roberts, and he is the lead senior pastor of an evangelical church. And years ago, when he decided that he's going to start reaching out to Muslims, specifically imams and leaders, you know, he lost like 1,000 people in his congregation. He knew he was doing the right thing, and he also lost a lot of money, because when you lose people like that, you're losing, you know, funds to run your operation, to run your church. Yes. But he kind of went forward with it, and what he does is, like, he's part of a fluid organization. It's not like a bureaucracy, but there's people around the world that assist him, and they match up religious leaders. So like an imam and a rabbi and a priest and a bishop, and that. And it starts there with leaders, in the hope that the leaders can bring back ideas to their communities, but also be bold leaders, and kind of just saying, this is what we're doing. This is where I'm taking you. I mean, think of like some of the more influential people in history, like Jesus, Muhammad, like some of these other prophets, whoever it might be. You know, they're bringing their people into unknown territory. And even the disciples and the companions were like, no, like, this is nuts. Like, what are we doing? And these people are just like, no, like, we're doing this because this is the right thing to do. So I think it's happening. It happens through strong leadership. It happens through vision. And I also think that another way of kind of building these bridges is forgetting about religion, having interfaith moments without interfaith discussions. So, for instance, like, let's go out and feed people that need food. Let's go out together and clean up trash. Let's start there. That's that humanity level that we can start at. And then when we're doing these things, we can talk about why these actions, or how the religion is informing these actions. Yeah. I think you can find things to work on with people that don't have to be religion oriented. Just humanity. I think that helps.
I mean, it's you can break it down to, you know, to having a club, right? So you and me, we can have two separate clubs. So my club likes the color blue, and we wear blue hats, and your club likes red, the color red, and you wear red hats, right? So that's like our separate clubs. But then we realize that the hat factory is on fire. And we need to put that fire out. And then there's a common problem that we need to address. There's this problem that actually unifies us.
Yes.
Because we both need hats.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if your hat is red or blue, it's on fire.
Yeah. Humans need hats, or humans need clothing. And actually, this is a really good point, and it reminds me of a pastor that I was recently listening to, and he's from West Virginia. And if you're familiar with West Virginia, you know, it's a pretty, you know, it's struggling with a lot of things. And one thing that it's really struggling with is the opioid crisis.
Right. And
I'm sure you're familiar with the opioid crisis here in the States. And I don't know if it's hitting Sweden and the EU, but it's
not on that scale. because of different reasons, but it's in a smaller scale. Yeah.
So this pastor was dealing with significant issues within his congregation, and he was like, I was burying 4 to 5 young people a year, people coming to him with addiction problems, and he reached out to other religious leaders, and he learned that this opioid crisis addiction is not bias, that it impacts all people. And he was realizing through his conversations with some imams that there was also an opioid crisis within this Muslim community. And the word that he used, he was like, addiction does not discriminate. Addiction can get anyone. It doesn't matter what religion or race or ethnicity or cultural background you're from. Like, it impacts everyone. And that was the initial jumping off point of this connection between this pastor and this Muslim leader. It was a crisis that's impacting the community. And, since then, I think they've grown in various ways, and they've brought their communities together for food and, taking measures to make sure people feel accommodated in certain spaces. So even something like, if you're going to invite Muslims over to your church, have halal food. That's a good starting point. Just be knowledgeable of that. And, we can go from there. So I guess there's beauty in struggle, but the beauty only comes when people realize that, we all struggle. It doesn't matter what religion or what God you believe in, or if you don't believe in God either. We all are interconnected in some way, in some capacity, and we can work together to solve some of these common problems.
I mean, this was it a bishop or a priest?
The guy from West Virginia?
Yes.
He's a pastor. Yeah, he's not, pastor.
I mean, people like this pastor or other examples of community leaders or religious leaders who try to connect the groups or try to build bridges. It includes a risk. I mean, I met a female imam in Denmark. Her name is Shirin Kankan. She calls herself an imama.
Nice.
We had her on the Swedish podcast a while back.
I saw that on your YouTube channel, I think.
Yeah, she has this really interesting journey and a lot of inspiring examples of what she has done, but also how much effort she has put in and how much she has sacrificed and how much risk that is involved in both personal risk, but also the risk, of her life and her safety and her kids and her family and her friends. So it's not. I mean, it's not just to do something like that. And I mean, this pastor lost 1,000 people from his congregation. Yep. I mean, that's one price to pay, but it could be even worse than that. And I'm wondering about the mechanisms. It's almost like we don't want to go into that space of connection. It's almost like it's so much suffering and pain associated with getting out of our boxes or doing something different. I mean, I'm still hopeful, but coexistence goes through a lot of effort and pain, I think. And people are already struggling with their lives.
Yeah. It's a lot to ask of people. It's like, asking this community in West Virginia to have better relations with a different religious community when they haven't even figured out these issues within their own community. That's not fair. Exactly. It's not realistic. So that, we do have to, and I agree with you here, we do have to kind of be realistic with our expectations, and we can't be so demanding of everyone on every single issue. the world is not perfect. It's messy. People are dealing with their struggles, and we just need to have a bit more compassion with that. Understand, like, we don't know necessarily what people are going through.
Yeah.
A lot of people hide some of these feelings that they're feeling, and we just, compassion doesn't hurt. I'll say that. And then the other thing I'll say too, based on what the comments that you just provided, we need to find ways of, I don't know if it's teaching people that there's benefit in interacting with the other, but like maybe it is that. Like maybe we have to educate in a certain way to persuade people that actually, like, interacting with this community that you've never interacted with is a good idea, and it's going to help you. Here's why.
Yeah,
would be an effective tool, especially with the youth. Teaching them that there's benefit in this, and like I'm almost posing this question to myself, like, what is the benefit of it? And
yes,
I think it goes back to that individual, everyday, personal piece that we've been talking about that starts within the individual. The more you know about our common humanity, the more positive experiences you could potentially have. So like if you're out somewhere in society and like you see someone wearing something that you don't like, if you have knowledge of that, or if you've or interacted with someone who's actually worn that before, then you know that there's nothing to fear there. There's nothing to be annoyed about. You have context and knowledge on the underlying issues pertaining to whatever it might be, whether it's a symbol or something that someone said. So it's like, it's going back to just feeling comfortable. Like feeling comfortable is good. Feeling uncomfortable is potentially constructive, but like if you teach people to get outside of their box, there's more potential for them to understand the rhythms, the logistics, the logics, and the complexities of our humanity. And if you have knowledge of those things, then maybe you're just more happy on an everyday basis.
and I believe that's true. And I also believe that people will leave their boxes if they feel safe. Mm-hmm. They won't be, people are not prone to be shamed out of the boxes or like harassed out of their boxes. And sometimes I see the discussion of diversity and coexistence and the battle between religions, sometimes especially from the left, that like there's this peace project which is forced upon us with shame. Yes. I don't think that's the way to go.
Nope.
I mean, if we want people to come out of their boxes, first of all, we need to provide a safe environment where people are able to sometimes maybe say the wrong words because they don't know. Sometimes ask stupid questions because we don't know. Sometimes, step on someone's toe or make a mistake. And when we do that kind of mistake, we need to be met in a loving way. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't call someone a towel head, and this is why. Or maybe you shouldn't, maybe you shouldn't put ham on those sandwiches because of ... And consider the fact that people are trying their best, and when they fail, I think that's like one of the most important parts of society at the moment, not only considering religion and religious tensions, but also, on social media, for example, being human includes a lot of messing up, a lot of, making mistakes. And at the moment, we're not treating each other with, the forgiving hand.
Yeah. Well, we're treating each other as if like we should know, like you should know better. You should be perfect. In the States at the moment, I don't know if you have this in Sweden, but like the cancel culture. You ever heard of
sure.
Yeah,
for
cancel
sure.
culture. Like I mean, I'm not really a fan of this, and it goes back to what you're saying, like shaming people. It's like, oh, like you said something wrong. And it's just like this blasting of like, you're terrible, you're evil, you're a racist, you're a bigot. Like if people continuously do things over and over again, then like I'm not saying we have to cancel people, but it's like that's different from someone saying something out of ignorance, or someone saying something out of lack of knowledge. But again, like, what's our end goal? Is our end goal just feeling good about ourselves because we have this type of knowledge and we know better and we get to lash out at people who don't think like we do? Like, if that's the case, then that's someone's personal ego getting involved because they just want to feel right. They want to feel empowered. But like, if the end goal is this kind of idealistic peace we're talking about at a individual, communal, national, world level, then you engage with that person. You say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. Do you have a minute? Like, this is just going to be a really easy conversation. And then you just try to talk to them about it. Like, if that is the goal, then that is good. But if the goal is simply to cancel people and to shame them into oblivion, forget it. Like, it's just not going to work. If anything, it puts up the walls, And actually, Naveed, I have a question for you. Like, we were talking about the necessity of the brave space, but the need, or let's call it the hope for a brave space, but the necessity of a safe space. That brave space can't exist without a safe space. So how do you create that safe space? Like, for instance, like in my race and ethnic relations class, like we engage in this type of work. So how do you create that environment? Like, do you have tools or exercises that you can use to make sure that brave space is a possibility?
So first of all, I want to be clear on what I mean with a brave space and also what I mean with a safe space, because I think both are needed. So the brave space, I think, is if you want to facilitate a brave space, you need to set the room with a clear intention, like a dojo. We're going in here to exercise, to become stronger, and you're going to get a bunch of bruises, but it's not about you. It's not personal. So before you get into that room, you need to be clear on what is this space, what's the intention of this space, what's the desired outcome from this space, and most importantly, what are the rules? So you need to clarify the game, because it's a game. It's not for real. It's just a game. And the purpose of the game is to be, so the intention of the game is to be brave, but the desired outcome of the game is to be smarter or more connected or anything that the group sets up. And then when you wanted to create a safe space, you do the same thing, but you have different rules. You have a different intention and a different desired outcome. So you can play, actually, you can just play any game you like, but you need to clarify the rules and the setup. I think that's like basic facilitation of facilitating. Yeah,
I agree. So would the two games have, I mean, you clearly mentioned that they kind of do have different rules.
Yeah.
So how do you like transition from a safe space to a brave space? Like, is it a moment it's like, okay, we've done the safe space, we're now into brave space. Like, what does that look like?
I mean, imagine you're having like a really amazing day with your friends, right? You're out hiking or you're on the beach and you're all, drinking Coronas, you're taking a swim, there's sand everywhere, your hair is all messy, you're hanging out with your friends. You're not putting up, that image of yourself. You're just relaxed. You're feeling vulnerable because you can. That's more of a soft space, right? And then you get back home and you put some music on and you get a shower and you're dressing up to go to the club. And the club, it's not a hostile environment, but it's more of a tense environment because, you're dancing, you're flirting, you're competing with other alpha males, and it's another kind of tension. And then you need to consider that when you go out. So these are just two different spaces. You can go between, but you need some kind of transition. So in this case, it could be like the pre-party or the dressing up or the shower, but you need some kind of transitioning ritual to do that. And whatever you do, I don't even think it matters what you do, but you need to do a transitioning ritual with the intention to take you from this place to another place. Some kind of, you could call it decompression or transition, anything you like, but you need to do something in between.
I really like that. I'm thinking how these things play out in a educational setting. I have 15 weeks for a course, and a lot of what you said plays out, but it's hard to differentiate, I think. Ideally, do you just start off by saying brave space, we're going to mess up, you're going to get hurt, you can say whatever you want, but you have to grow? Is that the best way to initiate a learning environment, or is the better way of saying, let's create the safe environment first? What does that look like, especially in an educational setting, you think?
Right.
I'm just picking your brain because I feel like you have a lot of insight here.
You mean if you it depends. So sometimes you want to go into the brave space immediately. Sometimes you want to start off by creating a safe space. I often do a safe space first, just to help people to feel safe and secure and get to know each other and get to know people's intention on an individual basis. Before you go into the brave space, you need to know we're not here to harm each other. We're here because we're curious, or we'd like to do some work, or we want to grow. And that's best, I think, facilitated in the safe space. And you can start off with a safe space, create those bonds and that kind of safety, and create a space that invites vulnerability. And it's easier to build a brave space upon that safe space, I think.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, but also, I think it's more effective, instead of saying, I think it's more effective to co-create. I could tell the group what I think, but for the intention of building a group that it feels empowered to do it on their own, I believe in co-creation. I co-create the roles, I co-create the intention, I co-create the whole design. So the first thing I do is that I create the design with the group. And I ask them, what would you like to be leaving with in the end of the day? What would you like to feel when we're done here? And what would be valuable for you to bring home with you after this is over? And then we start to create the space together. And that's the most effective way of creating a strong group, I believe. And if it's a safe space or a brave space, it doesn't matter. I think it's best and more effective created and designed with the group.
I like that. So it's organic, it's fluid.
Yeah.
It depends on kind of where you're at. In a lot of ways, it's organized, but it's not. You just kind of you have a vision and you have an idea of when you kind of need to be where you want to be, but you just let it flow pretty much.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's good. That's pretty much what I do, but every semester I'm refining my tactics and making sure that it's more explicit and putting the seeds in the ground so that these roots can actually grow in a good way. So I appreciate that insight.
I'm really curious about when you conduct your classes. When does the tension peak? What's the most difficult areas of discussion?
Depends on what class, but for instance, my Muslims in American Society class, that's kind of my go-to one. I teach it every semester. To be fair, the institution that I teach at, it's, how do I put this? I would say the overwhelming majority of students are really there to learn in the most optimistic and ideal way, where they're there with an open mind, and like they don't bring a ton of misconceived things into class. So like the groundwork is already there to really to grow. But the issues that seem to ruffle feathers in this class would be LGBTQ plus rights. That seems to be an issue. I do think sometimes the matter of covering or hijab will come up. That kind of ruffles people the wrong way.
In what way?
I think, for instance, like I bank on guest speakers a lot. Like I have a ton of guest speakers into my class, and I try to get all these different perspectives. And there's never a semester where I don't invite a Muslim woman who does cover. So sometimes you have a woman up in front of 50 students who happens to observe hijab, and she's like, I choose this out of my own initiative or for my own self-worth. And I think a lot of people just don't get that. They're like, how is covering like good for you? Like I think there's still some misunderstanding on that issue. No matter how much like a Muslim woman or a hijabi is in front of a class saying like, I do this because I want to do it, and I'm doing it because for religious reasons, for modesty reasons. Like I still think people are like, yeah, I don't get that. It's still kind of alien to them.
Right.
I had someone, a Muslim leader in Houston, come to class, and he was just like, homosexuality is forbidden in the Islamic tradition, and I was like, oh, damn. I was like, man, what are these? But like I like that, like I don't like it, but like he didn't hold back. And I don't want my students to be like, oh my God, like cancel culture, like this guy sucks. Like I don't want them to be like that. And we actually had a constructive conversation about it. But like, it's violent. A comment like that is violent for some people because there are some gay people in class, and like to have someone who I invited into class to basically say like, gay people, like there's something wrong with them. Like for me, like, that sucks. Like I don't want students to be in my class to feel like there isn't that safe space. Like when you have a guest speaker come in who's blatantly like attacking like your very essence, like who you are as a person, that's tough. But again, I think one of the underpinning things that we've really highlighted here is like this work is not easy. Like you're gonna have controversies. You're gonna get hurt. You may unfortunately rub someone the wrong way. We just need to be more diligent with how we engage with one another and make sure that we're communicating with one another. And I think this one student in this context with the LGBTQ plus issue, like he was pretty cool about it. But if I invited a guest speaker who was like to the right of this guest speaker, and he was using really like fiery rhetoric against gay people, then that could have been a different ballgame. So those are the two major issues. Like anything relating to like, Islam means terrorism or jihad. Like I think they've seen through that kind of BS, like the media narratives. They've seen through that. It's usually around like sexuality and gender.
Right. And I mean, in this scenario, you invited the guest speaker. Not even though he had this point of view, but maybe also because he did. And then you invited that friction into class. But I mean, if this was a college on the West Coast and the word got out.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, I also didn't I invited him to speak. Here's what I do with guest speakers. I'm like, I'm inviting you because I feel like you have value and you have insight, and I think people could learn, and I think you could also benefit from it. And then I'm like, I want you to speak on the issues that you're most passionate about, because if you're speaking passionately, then the students will probably absorb that. So without revealing what this guest speaker spoke about, like, it had really nothing to do with like LGBTQ, like gay anything. And it just happened to come up. And I think that kind of that comes with the, I mean, it's just kind of random. Like there's nothing that, you know, I'm not going to agree with everyone on everything, you know, like I'm sure even you and I, like, I think we would agree on a lot of things, but I'm sure there's things that we don't agree on. And that doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you.
Right.
So,
but is there a limit? Is there like a limit to what you accept in your class?
yes.
Is there a person you would not invite, even if it were interesting and in a research point of view would be valuable?
That's a really good question. It really depends on the extent in which they're doing it. Like, I'll give you an example. I was in Indianapolis at a convention, Muslims of the World convention. I don't know if you follow them on Instagram, but they're a good count. And there was a sheikh there, and he was condemning, he was referring to it as homosexuality. He was condemning it, saying that Islam is against it. But like the way in which he was condemning it really got under my skin to the point where I had to get up and I had to walk out. He was like, they're like, he's saying about gay people, like they're dirty. Like they're dirty people. And I was like, this is completely unacceptable. With that said, you know, would I invite a religious leader? They don't even have to be Muslim, like any type of religious leader who doesn't believe that their particular religious faith agrees with gay lifestyles. Like, I wouldn't say no, but again, it depends on like the ferocity in which these people are talking about these things. You know, if they're coming at it in a cool, calm, scholarly perspective, then maybe. But if like this person or this guest speaker, like their one thing is like, you know, denouncing Muslims or denouncing Islam, I don't think I would. So I'm not trying to beat around your question by any means, but like the context matters. Yeah. It depends on how fiery the person is, you know?
Yeah.
Like, would I invite like a KKK leader to class? Man, I might be out of a job, I'll tell you that. It depends on.
Well, that's that. I mean, exactly. That's what we were talking about before. That's the risk. That's the risk part. And I don't have any opinion about you or anyone else taking or not taking risks. I'm just thinking about the aspect of risk taking, because if you invite someone like this guy talking about homosexuals as dirty, which is not, it's not uncommon. Right. It's not uncommon amongst people of belief to use that kind of rhetoric. But in my well, I'm not a college professor. I'm just this, you know, kind of activist podcaster. But I mean, in my world, that person, the KKK leader or the really aggressive religious leader is an object for observation and research. I mean, I'm really interested in the extremes. They don't represent us, but they say something about us. In an almost like a collective archetypical way. It's like the extreme of the tyrant, and to know how to invite more of like the good king. If we're talking about the archetypes and it's like the Jungian perspective, I need to know like the darkness of the tyrant as well, and to study that to know how to not become that. Not only myself, but as a collective, as a society. I think it's valuable to study and to know that part of ourselves. But I don't have any opinion of where and who should do that work. I'm just intrigued myself.
No, me too. And I think we're coming at it from different like roles, not perspectives, because I think we're in agreement. Not that it matters, but I think we're in agreement on the fundamentals here. But like for me, like it's almost like as well like being like a a guardian of sorts, like being a teacher, like, you know, they ideally, like, they trust me. And like, what if this guest speaker leaves and people feel like that did like more harm than it did good? Like, what, it's like cost benefit analysis, you know, like, could these people just have learned about this person like via a YouTube video, you know, like it really just depends. It depends on a context. Like I'll give you an example. Like I invited Ashton Woods, who is the founder of Black Lives Matter Houston, and he's a black man who's gay, and he does not F around at all. Like he just says what he wants to say, and he's very, very passionate about it. And he came and spoke to my social problems class. Was about 90 people, and there were a lot of football players at Rice University who happened to be in my class. And some of these guys are, you know, from middle America, from small farms, who, for them, like Black Lives Matter is just like, whoa, like what is this? And you know, it ruffled some feathers, but that speaker is a lot different from someone who's coming from a position of like pure hate. You know, it was controversial enough for someone to come in and basically say like, yeah, the cops are messed up and the system doesn't care about black people. I mean, for people of color, that's kind of nothing new. But for a lot of the white people, they were like, whoa, which was good. I mean, but Ashton, you know, he is about, I think, as high as I would go. Like, would I, now that I'm getting to your question, like, would I invite a KKK guy? I'd say 45% probably no, 55% yes. It really depends. And then I'd have to get security and like, and like all this stuff as well. Yeah. It's different. You know, I have to deal with the bureaucracy as well of a university. And, you know, unfortunately, like, there's not a lot of tolerance on that campus for positions that don't easily fit like the left narrative. Right. There was some YouTuber from England who was invited to campus. I mean, you know, he had some questionable views in my opinion, but I mean, he wasn't like he wasn't advocating for genocide or everything. And a bunch of student organizations objected, and the college Republicans ended up canceling his invite.
Do you remember who it was?
I don't, man. He's a YouTuber.
I missed one.
Oh no, I think he was from Canada, actually.
All right.
Yeah, that's about as much as, I mean, I can follow up and let you know who it was, but like a lot of students were coming up to me and they were asking like, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, well, like, you know, what would the benefit be of someone like this coming to campus? Like, can something constructive come out of it outside of him just being an object for like hatred and prejudice, you know? And I think that's hard to evaluate. Like, what is the benefit of this? I mean, it's a hypothetical. Like, if we invited this person, like, you know, what could we potentially get from it? And I think that's a question for me that's always on my mind when I'm thinking about guest speakers.
It also depends on the intention of what we want the campus to be, right? I mean, when these discussions surfaced, it was clear to me that we're not in agreement of what a campus is or what it should be.
Good point.
I mean, for some people, the campus is a safe place, and for some people, the campus is a brave space. And that has become more and more clear to me. Like the last 10 years, I've been really paying attention to what's happening in the States, and I've seen the colleges on the West Coast, and I've seen the colleges, you know, in Middle America, and the difference in how they treat the matter. I mean, the University of Chicago, I think, with the Chicago principles, is like a perfect anti-reaction to the safe spaces. It's like if you want to study here, you're gonna get bruised. Yeah. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And when you get bruised and when you fall down, we'll help you up. That's our job, to help you get stronger, not to safer.
Yeah. I mean, this is an interesting point, especially based on what I was just providing. Like Rice, we have this thing called like the culture of care, and like that is like the #1 staple of the university at the moment. and like trying to develop that. And but there's a lot of like canceling going on because of that safe space where people are just written off. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, there's a bar on campus, and there was a Halloween party, and these 3 young men dressed up as ICE officers, which is obviously, you know, questionable. I don't know why they were doing that. And, you know, they were canceled. And by that, I mean, you know, there was like 4 articles in 1 week, just basically elaborating on why they messed up. These 3 young students had to come out publicly, and because
were they canceled from campus or from school?
From campus. They were like 2 freshmen and a sophomore.
All right.
And there was pictures, and the pictures were on the school newspaper. It's a really good school newspaper. Multiple articles were written, named them by name. They came out through the journalists on the website basically saying, you know, we messed up. But then like after that, like they had like a public forum, and like they put these 3 kids on stage, and they were just like, you know, it's like Game of Thrones, like shame when Cersei was walking through the streets. And like, I didn't say anything at the time, but like, I don't think that's the best way of teaching these 3 young men why that was disruptive, why that bothered people, and I don't think shaming people helps people to grow. I really don't. I think it's just they realize they did something bad and they won't do it again, but they really don't understand the issue on a deeper personal or like even spiritual level. So like we do get some of that. You know, and I think I'm in between like the safe space and the brave space, you know, like I do in my role have to be careful, which is just a fact of my life there. But at the same time, like I am trying to push us closer to that space, that brave space. It's tough, man. I'm not going to lie. It's tough.
I know. And I really appreciate you being so, I mean, again, choosing both. I really see the necessity of a safe space and also a brave space, and I'm not the one deciding where to have what, and I'm interested in both. And I could see how they could work together on a campus. Unfortunately, that's not what I'm seeing, especially on the West Coast. I'm seeing the campuses becoming safe spaces, and I don't think that's the way to go. I think we could use both levels and both dimensions on campus, but not only one. But I'm also interested in knowing, I mean, when you think about your work, when you envision yourself doing what you do, what's the intention? What's like the greater purpose of what you're doing?
Oh, that's a really good question. My greater purpose. You know, man, I don't really think I have one. I don't consciously ever think of that. I never am like, you know, this is what, you know, at the end of my life, if I can do this, then I'm happy. I think I have every day, not goals, but objectives, living my life a certain way, in tune with my creator. Like that for me is a measure of success, and that's a goal. And by that, I mean, you know, being open-minded, being compassionate, thinking outside of the box, being there for people, emphasizing our common humanity rather than some of these identity categories, being merciful, you know, taking care of myself and taking care of my loved ones. And by that, I also mean, you know, communities and the country that I'm kind of indebted to, and the world. So it's very like, it's quite simple. It's just values. It's not, I don't have a grand plan. I definitely don't have a grand plan. I try to live every day for what it is. And when people knock on my door, I listen. I open the door and I listen. When people come to me with ideas or plans or projects, I listen and I consider them. And, to a certain degree, I don't feel like I'm totally in control. Like I think a lot of my life and a lot of our lives are random. Like we can do what we want to do, but only to a certain extent. There are barriers and there are walls that are inevitably going to be run into by each and every one of us. But I don't have an answer to your question, really. But like I hope I tried to describe. That's who I am. What I just described is who I am, and my goal is to be at peace with myself. Because if I'm at peace with myself, then there's a better chance of me being at peace, as we've been talking about, with everyone around me, and that's it.
Do you think that your Catholic background has helped you in a way to connect with people from other beliefs? Like, would it have mattered if you were an atheist or more secular in your worldview?
That's a good question. To be honest, like my faith is more of a personal thing. Like I'm able to find examples in history or teachings from the church or biblical passages that relate to my interfaith peace work. Yeah. But like my faith is very, very personal first and foremost, and it provides me with guidance. It provides me with a idea of what happens when I'm no longer here, but it provides me with a reality. It provides me with a structure. So I don't think it has really impacted I don't want to call it professional work. I don't like calling it that. It's just what I do. My faith is personal to me, and I think first and foremost that's the role and function that it plays. But with that said, like I'm definitely able to use my faith, not use it, but to share my faith in a way that can create connections and bridges between different communities.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is I'm going to do a parallel to martial arts. I mean, if you do karate and I do jiu-jitsu, we both have a practice. And if there's a third friend of ours who's just watching Netflix and not doing anything at all, he doesn't understand the concept of having a practice, and that's what I mean by you using your concept of belief and being able to connect with people of other beliefs.
Well, I'll say this, like one thing that I have dug into a little bit, and this was especially pertinent when I was living in Ireland, understanding the historic plight of the Catholics in Ireland and everything that they went through, not only in Ireland, but also in the United States. And as someone who hopes that he's in touch with his ancestors and this kind of, mythological realm that I like to kind of exist in, and feeling like my ancestors are living through me, like they went through a lot. And that experience that I've read about is informing how I see contemporary events. So when we see something like, this Sharia boogeyman in the United States, like Sharia law is here to take over the world, and there's some caliph in some foreign land that wants to supersede the Constitution and destroy us all. Like those are the same narratives that were applied to the Irish Catholics in Ireland and also the Irish Catholics in the United States. So I see through the BS, basically. So from a historic perspective, yes, my faith in that capacity is informing, my everyday existence and some of my work. And then, yeah, I mean, maybe I was being a bit too protective of my own personal faith earlier, but like, obviously, like it's easy to see someone like Jesus or some of the influential Christian figures throughout history that, who I look up to and I admire, and I respect greatly their teachings. Like, I can see their lives playing out in some of the work that I do. Obviously, Jesus, the Prince of Peace, and reaching out. Jesus was reaching out to like prostitutes, like the destitute, like people that everyone had given up on. And I think to a certain degree, like, I do work on the periphery. There's only 6 million Muslims in the United States, and most people don't even know a Muslim. And like, I happen to be a guy that interacts a lot with Muslims, and people probably think I'm crazy for that. But so I see some of these religious figures throughout history playing out. But like I said, like, at a very, very fundamental level, like, faith in religion it's just personal, man. Like, I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, you know what? Like, one of the reasons why I'm religious is because when I die, I want a funeral. That's it. I want a proper or organized structure, and that's it. And like, when the shit hits the fan and I feel like I need God, I know where to go. I'm going to go to a church, and I know what the practice is. I know what the ritual is. And for me, like, it's quite simple. It's that, So now, these are really good questions. Thank you for these. So there is there is like a professional connection as well. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because I was brought up in a atheist, like a militant atheist home. But I also saw my grandmother, who's a devoted Muslim, and I always felt like this. I almost felt like jealous of her having a belief, having like a connection to God, having a structure. She had gamified her existence in a way that I didn't.
Yeah.
And it's like, I really appreciate when Sam Harris asked Jordan Peterson if he believed in God. Jordan Peterson answered, "I live my life as if God exists." And I would say I'm almost like in that between space. Like, I see the necessity of a belief and a belief structure and a community of belief, but I also don't buy the whole thing, and I also see the value in disbelief and in skepticism. So I'm in between there as well.
I'm the same way,
Yeah.
Like, it's being a healthy skeptic, and like, something for me too, like, and I mentioned that it's a personal thing in a lot of ways. Like, without going into details, I was mentioning a little bit about this earlier, but like, we all go through stuff in life, and like, I had gone through something when I was in Dublin, and I have not always been Catholic. I was raised Catholic. Like, I think I went through a phase of being like agnostic or atheist, like kind of whatever you want to call it. It was my younger days from 16 to 26. Like, I was just floating around in religion, even though I was studying the Islamic tradition and interacting with Muslims. Like, I wasn't really connected to any faith, and I was just going through stuff, and like, long story short, like, something happened within me, and I was like, man, like, I need some guidance here, like, whether it's structure or clarity or having that one thing that you can say, like, this is who I am. And like, I started going to church again, and like, I had to like relearn everything. Like, I forgot how to do mass, and like, I just sat, like, after the first mass, I just sat in my pew, and I was just like, it was really emotional, and I was like, wow, like, I've gotten off the path that I think I was supposed to be on. And I kind of just said to myself, like, this is who I'm going to be now. And it's not, I'm not super strict with it. Like, as I mentioned earlier, like, I'm not going to church every day. Like, I don't believe in everything. I don't believe in the dogma. I don't believe in the entirety of the Bible. Like, there's a lot of things that I'm a skeptic of. But for me, my faith is what it is at a very personal level. And like, no one can F with it. No one can take it away from me. It's who I am. and it serves a purpose for me. And like, that may be selfish and that may be heretical, but like, to be honest, I don't really care. I don't care what other people say about my faith. It doesn't bother me this way or that.
So in your point of view, I see you as a bridge between groups and between people, and also that invites the possibility of a lot of interesting observations. So in your experience, what do Westerners get wrong with Muslims? Like what are like the main things people often get wrong about Muslims?
That they're just different, that they're like living some type of existence that is like completely different and at worst incompatible with like a Western way of life, you know, like almost thinking like it's like a different like breed of human beings. Like these are like almost like not human beings. Like they're alien. They're something different. So Westerners fail, broadly speaking, Westerners like are failing to see the humanity in Muslims, like failing to see again that they're fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, leaders. They're forgetting all that stuff, and they're just seeing the identity category of Muslim. And then when you have that type of worldview and that type of thinking, that's only going to be informed not by the people you interact with, but by the media. So they're not seeing our common humanity. That's the big thing. I mean, if you want me to keep going on, I can definitely go on with all the stereotypes, but I think that's the number one thing. Like we're forgetting that we're all human, and we're forgetting that, you know, we all have red blood. When we're cut, we bleed, we get sick, we get happy, we love, we cry, we sleep. Like we're forgetting all these things. Like this is who we are as a human race. That's who we are first and foremost. Forget the races and the ethnicities and the religions. We're humans. And we need to start there. Like that's where we need to start before we, you know, dive into Quran chapter 4 verse whatever. You know, like let's start by being human first. You can't dissect all of these complicated passages of how Muhammad treated Jewish people, or why did the Crusades develop as they did. I mean, these are really complicated things that need to be dissected and explained in a very systematic way over multiple days. It doesn't happen overnight, this clarity. So we just need to get back to the basics. Breaking bread is always the best way of initiating some type of connection between people.
I totally agree. I mean, it's easier to discuss friction in a brave space if you start off by finding common ground in a safe space. And I mean, breaking bread and you know, being human as a foundation, and on that foundation then having these hard discussions about coexistence. I think that's an easier way to go than starting off by, you know, looking at what's different and what's not working, or where the friction is. And that's why I really see like the power of conversation, but also the power of stories. One of our former guests, Tamer Katan, who is born in Egypt, has been brought up here in the States, and he's a comedian and a podcaster. So he has this bit in his stand-up where he talks about the lack of a sitcom with Arabs. Like there's no Everyone Loves Muhammad. There's all these TV shows about these different ethnic groups that helped us, you know, seeing these people as humans. But there's no sitcom for Arabs, and there's no. I mean, I would say there's no sitcom with Arabs for Americans.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're seeing some ground being broken with some comedians, which is really good. Like just kind of bursting the stereotypical bubble. But I must say, like, you know, I'm optimistic with relations, but like we're still at a very, very like elementary level of things. You know, like, do Muslims believe in God? Like I hear questions like that. You know, like, do Muslims believe in God? Like, or no joke, Naveed, like I was in like Palm Beach, Florida, like 10 years ago, and we were at an event not far from Mar-a-Lago, and we were doing research, and a woman came up to us, and she was like, do Muslim mothers love their children? And I was like, yeah. And she was just like, oh my God, that is amazing. And she's like, thank you so much for telling me that. I'm just so happy that they do that. And I was just like, wow. I mean, is that where we're at? You know, like, how many people like that are thinking this way in the United States? You know, I mean, it's very, very concerning, for sure, especially because, you know, you have the Islamophobia industry, you have this network of activists, bloggers, politicians, religious leaders who are going into a lot of these small Christian communities and giving talks that are rooted in fear and misinformation, and, you know, deliberately stoking the fire and deliberately creating the walls between us. And that's really, really hard to combat. You know, these people aren't stupid either, you know, like these people in the Islamophobia industry, like, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're well funded. And, you know, the kind of counter Islamophobia industry, if you want to call it that, like, you know, we need to do better. I don't know if that means we need more money to back us so we have more resources or whatever, but, like, you know, it's a game, as you were mentioning earlier. It's a game, and, like, it's about reaching people. It's about reaching hearts and minds, and shaping people and giving them exposure to ideas that are more accurate than what the Islamophobia industry is presenting.
I mean, I wouldn't call it an industry, because if then it gives this image of it being like consistent and homogenic, like being a monolith. I don't think that it has like a, because I mean, the word industry almost gives it some kind of conspiracy, like, you know, there's a group of sort, you know, reaching a common goal. I just think it's chaos and fear, but also a lot of, you know, there's also a lot of, sometimes we forget that people who work in the media, or people who work in like the TV or movie industry creating narratives, they also have families, and they also need to make money to get their lives, you know, in order, and to be able to put food on the table. And if you see that, like, this narrative of separation works, it sells newspapers, and I need to sell newspapers to be able to keep my job, to feed my family, because I don't want my family to starve. Then suddenly it's more complex than that, right? I don't think that people do that from a like a evil kind of, you know, place. I think it's like I said before, maybe those people sit on the most fear.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that, like, students often ask, like, when I do provide them with you know, examples of individuals who fall into this network, whatever you want to call it, and they're like, do you think this individual really believes in what they're saying? And I have no answer for that, you know, but, like, I do bring up the financial thing. Like, these people make a lot of money, you know, like, New York Times best-selling authors, you know, and, like, as they say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Maybe they're just doing it because they have found a successful approach and a successful narrative, and it's making them money. Like, why would you stop, you know? Unfortunately, like, that's human nature in a lot of ways, you know, like, once you've found something that is working, you know, like, and you're making money and you're benefiting and you're prospering, at least materially, why would you change? You know?
And the fear that they're tapping into is real. People are afraid. People are worried about their jobs, about their culture, about their country. And I don't, I'm really cautious about how I answer to that kind of fear and worry, about that experience of fear and worry, because people are actually unsafe. They're feeling unsafe. And me shaming them, me telling them that they're racist or bigots doesn't help.
Useless. Yeah, I mean, and this goes to what our goal is, you know, like, is our goal to merely denounce people for the benefit of ourselves, basically saying this person is wrong, you're a bigot, this is why you're wrong, this is my idea is better? Or is it to, you know, try to grow alongside people? Is it trying to get to understand people in the hope that we can embark on a journey towards a common ground? You know, I think ideally, like, that's where we need to go, rather than just simply, I mean, shaming people. Like, I see so much of it, especially like people that I really admire, who are just like kind of sitting on social media all day and like just nitpicking everything and being like, you're a racist, you're an Islamophobe, and like, I think there's a time and place for that stuff. You know, like, I think if someone is repeatedly doing something over and over again, I think it's good to be blunt and be like, hey man, like, you've been saying this stuff for 3 years. Like, this is racist and this is why it's racist. But like, that's not always the best approach, especially to a stranger. Like, you know, this stranger's gonna be like, they're gonna be like, I'm racist. Like, screw you, I'm not racist. Like, it's just a defense mechanism that people are gonna always put up. So.
And also, like, social media is not telling someone something. It's not that easy. I mean, if you want to tell someone they're racist, pick up the phone and call them and tell them they're racist.
Yep.
Saying it on social media is not telling someone something. It's screaming it from a stage across the audience to another stage, and then that guy screams something back at you. It's a play. It's not a conversation. It's a play.
Yeah, and it's easy. It's really easy. It's not the hard work. I mean,
it's cheap, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, you know, there have been moments in my life I'm like, say that to my face. Right. You know, like, they're like, oh, okay, never mind. You know, like, it's a lot harder to do a lot of things in person. You know, it's easy to bark at someone over the phone, but you know, when you have to look into someone's eyes with sincerity, they're basically saying, hey man, like, you know, I don't get why you're saying this. I want to talk to you about this. Like, I'm not trying to be, you know, holier than thou. I'm not trying to be morally superior to you. Like, I want to talk to you about this. Like, that's where it needs to start, I think.
So look, we've almost done 2 hours of conversation, man.
All right.
I would love to talk more, but I think this might be like a good stop for the first chapter of our conversation.
Sounds good. Yeah. Wow.
Looking forward to explore these subjects more with you in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we covered a lot of turf.
For sure. Yeah.
But there's always more, you know. And it was very organic too, you know. Like, it was. It flowed with itself, which is cool.
Yes, and I really appreciate your humility and your ability to just, you know, zoom out of something you just said and discover new depths to it. It's really, I appreciate that in the conversation, to be able to change your point of view. I surely learned a lot from you.
Likewise, yeah.
Appreciate it a lot.
Me too, and I appreciate all the insight and